Wine glass slicked from my mother-in-law's hand and shattered on the patio stones. And for one strange second, I thought that was going to be the worst sound of the night. It wasn't. The worst sound came about 40 seconds later, when my husband's phone face up on the cocktail table, screen catching the glow of the bistro lights strung above our backyard lit up with a video call. He'd left it there when he went inside to grab another bottle of Cabernet. 26 people were standing on our lawn celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary. My in-laws, my parents, our 2 daughters, his college roommates, the neighbors, the woman who'd been my maid of honor, and the name on the screen, in big white letters under a profile picture of a blonde in a Lululemon tank top, was Whitney. I want to back up, because if I start here, you'll think I'm some kind of monster who set her husband up at his own anniversary party. I didn't set him up. He set himself up. I just stopped catching him when he fell. My name is Margot Aisley. I'm 39 years old. I live in a tidy 4-bedroom colonial in Wexford, Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh, and 3 months before that party I would have told you without a moment's hesitation that I had the kind of marriage other women envied, my husband. I'll call him by what everyone called him then, which was just my husband, because his name doesn't deserve a second life in this story. Worked as a regional sales director for a medical device company. I'm a litigation paralegal at a firm downtown. We had 2 daughters, Hazel and June, ages 11 and 8, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a house I'd painted 4 different shades of off-white before I found the right one. The first crack in the floor happened on a Tuesday in February. I remember because I'd taken a half day to drive June to her orthodontist appointment, and on the way home, I stopped at a CVS to pick up his blood pressure prescription. The pharmacist printed the receipt and said, "Real casual, and we have the other one ready too, the Chalas." I just stood there. He was 41. We hadn't had any conversations about anything like that. We hadn't, frankly, had any conversations about our sex life in a long time, because I'd assumed we were both just tired. He traveled 3 weeks a month. I had 2 kids and a full-time job. Most nights we collapsed. I told the pharmacist there must be a mistake. She turned the screen toward me and showed me his name, his date of birth, his insurance card on file. Prescribed by a urologist in Cranberry Township, filled the first time in October. He'd been picking it up himself. I said I'd come back for both. I walked out to my car, sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes and didn't cry. I want you to remember that. I didn't cry. I drove home, made meatloaf, helped Hazel with her social studies project on the Lewis and Clark expedition, and when my husband called from his hotel in Cleveland to say goodnight to the girls, I let him talk to them, and then I told him I loved him, and I hung up, and I sat at our kitchen island, staring at a glass of Pinot Grigio for an hour without taking a sip. Then I started writing things down. I didn't have a plan yet. I had a notebook. A regular spiral one I bought for June's homework and never used. I wrote down the date of the prescription. I wrote down what the pharmacist had said. I wrote down every business trip he'd taken in the last 6 months that I could remember. I wrote down the names of the hotels he'd stayed at, because I booked some of them through our shared Marriott account. Then I made myself a promise I would not say one word to him until I knew everything. Not a hint, not a sigh, not a meaningful look across the dinner table. Because the moment he knew I was looking, he would start hiding things better, and I would never get the truth. That night was the last time I slept 8 hours. The next morning, I called my older sister Iris in Charlotte. Iris had been through her own divorce 6 years earlier. Her husband had emptied a 401k before she found a lawyer, and she'd told me, back then, things I hadn't really listened to. About community property versus equitable distribution, about hidden accounts, about the way men who are planning to leave start moving money around 18 months before they ever say the word. Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state. I learned that on my lunch break, reading on my phone in the firm's break room while I pretended to scroll Instagram. Equitable distribution doesn't mean 50-50. It means fair, and fair is whatever a judge decides is fair after looking at the whole picture. The longer the marriage, the more weight a stay-at-home contribution gets, the more years of earning disparity, the more it tilts. I worked at a law firm. I worked for litigators. I had spent 15 years pulling exhibits and indexing depositions and watching attorneys cross-examine men exactly like my husband. I knew what evidence looked like. I knew what a judge would believe and what a judge would shrug at. That afternoon, I walked down the hall to one of our family law partners. A woman named Constance Boyd, who'd been with the firm 30 years, closed her door, sat in the leather chair across from her desk and said, "I need to hire you, not the firm. You, personally. I don't want a single document about this in our system." She looked at me over her reading glasses. She'd known me for 11 years. She'd watched me bring Hazel into the office as a newborn, asleep in a sling. "Margot," she said, "sit. Tell me everything." I told her about the prescription. She didn't blink. She asked me about our finances. I told her what I knew: the joint checking, the joint savings, the kids' 529 plans, the house, his 401k, my smaller 401k, the Roth IRAs, the credit cards. She asked me if there was anything I didn't know. I sat there. I realized that for the last 3 years he'd been doing the taxes. Before that, we'd done them together at the kitchen table on a Saturday in March with takeout Thai food. But he'd hired an accountant when he got the regional director job. And after the first year, he'd just had me sign the e-file authorization without showing me the return. Constance wrote something down. She said, "Get me last year's return. Don't ask him for it. Find it. And start photocopying every statement that comes in the mail. Don't take originals. Don't open anything that's addressed only to him. You don't need to. You just need to know what's there." She told me her retainer. She told me not to put it on a joint card. I had a small inheritance from my grandmother sitting in a money market account in only my name, $6,000 I'd been saving for the girls' summer camps. I wrote her a check from that account. I drove home that night with my hands so tight on the steering wheel my fingers ached. That weekend, while he was at his nephew's bar mitzvah in Cleveland, a trip the kids and I were supposedly too sick to take, a lie I'd manufactured with the help of a convenient stomach bug, Hazel actually had. I went through his home office. I want to tell you, I felt powerful. I didn't. I felt like I was going to throw up. I'm a person who color codes the spice cabinet. I have never read someone else's mail in my life. I sat on the floor of his office with biscuit at my feet and made myself do it because the alternative was being a fool. In a banker's box behind his college yearbooks, I found statements from a Schwab brokerage account I had never heard of. Opened 19 months earlier. Initial deposit of $15,000. Regular deposits after that. Not huge. $2,000 and $3,000 at a time coming in from a checking account at PNC that I also didn't know existed. I sat on the carpet and stared at those statements until the numbers swam. Then I did something my sister had told me to do. I took out my phone and I photographed every page, both sides. Then I put everything back exactly the way I'd found it, down to the angle the box sat at on the shelf. Over the next 11 weeks, I built a case. I learned his patterns. He flew out Sunday nights and came home Thursday afternoons. The clients were always in Columbus, Indianapolis, Cincinnati. I started checking his location on the Family Find My app, not obsessively, just at certain hours, late dinners. The Marriott in Dublin, Ohio, where he stayed 3 weeks out of 4, sat right next to an apartment complex called The Reserve at Bridge Park. The little blue dot lived at the Reserve more nights than it lived at the hotel. I found her on LinkedIn in about 20 minutes. A pharmaceutical rep named Whitney who'd worked the same hospital accounts he did for the past 2 years. 31 years old, no wedding ring in her photos, a Peloton in the background of her work-from-home setup. She'd graduated from Ohio State. Her Instagram, which was public, had a picture from a Browns game in November where you could see, just barely on the bench next to her, the brown leather jacket I'd given my husband for our 10th anniversary. That was the night I cried. Just that once. In my car, in the Whole Foods parking lot, with 2 bags of groceries melting in the back seat, I cried for about 11 minutes, and then I wiped my face with a napkin from the glove compartment and drove home and made the kids spaghetti. I did not confront him. I did not confront him. I did not confront her. I went to see Constance again, and I brought the photographs and the screenshots and a timeline I'd built in a Google Doc that lived in an account I'd opened under my maiden name. Constance read through it for 40 minutes without speaking. When she was done, she took her glasses off and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "How much do you want?" she asked. I told her I wanted my daughters protected. I told her I wanted the house. I told her I wanted the truth about that Schwab account because $15,000 opened it and the balance now was $83,000, and I had a feeling that if we subpoenaed the PNC account that fed it, we were going to find a lot more. She told me a few things I hadn't known. First, that the cash he was putting into that account, if it had come from marital income, which it almost certainly had, was marital property regardless of whose name was on the account. Second, that under Pennsylvania law, what's called dissipation of marital assets, spending marital money on an affair, on gifts for a girlfriend, on hotel rooms, on jewelry, could be charged back against his share in the divorce. Third, that the longer I waited to file, the more time he had to move things, that the more time I had to find them. She suggested we wait until I had everything. We set a target. I would hold until I had bank records on the PNC account, until I had documentation of the apartment lease in Dublin if there was one, until I had a clean printout of his employer's expense reports if I could get them, and until I had positioned the girls and myself for what came next. That night I started running. I'd run in college. I hadn't run in 12 years. I started waking up at 5:15, lacing up shoes I had to dig out of the basement, and going 3 slow miles before anyone else was awake. I needed something that was mine. I needed lungs and legs and a heart that worked. I needed to feel my own body again as something other than a vehicle for carrying everyone else's needs. I also went back to my doctor and got a full STI panel. I'd like to spare you the details of why I needed to. I'll just say that I sat in that paper gown for 15 minutes before the doctor came in, and I made myself look at the ceiling tiles and count them, and I did not cry, because I had used up all my crying in the Whole Foods parking lot. Everything came back negative. I have never been so grateful for a piece of paper in my life. The hardest part wasn't the secrecy. The hardest part was being kind to him. I made his coffee in the mornings. I packed his suitcase on Sunday afternoons. I asked him about his week and listened to his answers. I lay next to him at night and let him put his hand on my hip the way he'd done for 15 years. And I did not flinch, because if I flinched, he would know. And if he knew, he would start lying better. I want to tell you something that no one tells you about discovering this kind of betrayal. It does not happen all at once. It happens every single morning when you wake up and remember for a second time. Every time he laughs at something on TV. Every time one of your daughters climbs into his lap. Every time his mother calls to ask what we want her to bring to Easter dinner. The grief is not a wave. It is a tide that comes in every 12 hours forever, and you have to walk around in it without anyone noticing. Your skirt is wet. His mother. I have to tell you about his mother. Her name was, and is, one of the great gifts of my adult life. She'd been a labor and delivery nurse for 35 years before she retired. She'd shown up at the hospital both times I gave birth and held my hand through Hazel's 22-hour labor while her son slept in a chair in the corner. She taught me how to make her grandmother's stuffing. She'd flown out to help me when June had RSV at 14 months, and I hadn't slept in 4 days. She loved me. I have known this since I was 23 years old, and she pulled me into her kitchen at Thanksgiving and said, "Margot, honey, you are the daughter I always wanted, and I am so glad my son had the good sense to find you." I knew, the way you know things in your bones, that she would believe me. I also knew that telling her too early was a risk. She loved her son. She loved me more, I thought, but he was her son. I waited until I had everything. In May, the PNC subpoena came back. He had been moving roughly $4,000 a month for 19 months out of our joint checking into that account, and from there into Schwab. Some of it went to a Visa card in only his name that I now had statements for. That Visa had paid for a one-bedroom apartment at the Reserve at Bridge Park, leased in his name, for the last 14 months. It had also paid for a David Yeoman bracelet, a pair of Tory Burch sandals, a weekend at the Greenbrier in West Virginia I had not taken, and a Lululemon order shipped to Whitney's address. I went to see his mother the following Saturday morning alone while he was supposedly at a golf tournament in Hershey. I drove to her condo in Mount Lebanon with a manila folder on the passenger seat and the worst nausea I'd had since I was pregnant with June. She opened the door in her gardening clothes and her face fell. "Margot, what is it? Is it one of the girls?" "The girls are fine," I said. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." She made tea. We sat at her kitchen table. She has a kitchen table. She has a kitchen table I have eaten approximately 400 meals at. I slid the folder across to her and I said, "Your son is having an affair. He has been for almost 2 years. I have proof. I am going to file for divorce in 3 weeks, and I am telling you now because I love you, and because I don't want you to find out from anybody else, and because I need to ask you something." She opened the folder. She read for a long time without saying anything. I watched her face go through about 6 different things: confusion, disbelief, recognition, pain, and then, last, the one I'd been most afraid of and most hoping for, anger. She closed the folder. She got up. She walked to the sink, ran the cold water, splashed it on her face, dried it with a dish towel, and came back and sat down. "What do you need?" she said. I told her. I needed her when I did what I was going to do, to not be surprised, to not defend him, to stand with me and with the girls in a way they would see. I told her I would never ask her to choose, but that the choosing was already happening whether anyone said it out loud or not. She reached across the table and took both of my hands in hers. Her hands were warm and dry from gardening, and they were stronger than you'd think a woman in her 60s hands would be. She said, "I raised him better than this. He knows better than this. He picked you because you were better than he was, Margot, and instead of trying to deserve you, he tried to have 2 of you. I will be at that party. I will stand right next to you. And after, you and the girls come stay with me as long as you need to." I did cry then. Just a little. She let me. We picked the anniversary party because his mother and I had already planned it together 6 months earlier, before I knew. She was going to host. She wanted to. She had a beautiful backyard, and we'd booked the caterer. We agreed we would not cancel. We would not move it. We would let him stand in his own family's backyard and let the moment come to him. In the meantime, I did some practical things. I opened a new checking account at a credit union, in only my name, at a branch he had never been to. I started having my paycheck direct deposited there instead of the joint account. I made sure to leave the joint account funded enough that he wouldn't notice anything missing. I just wasn't adding to it anymore. I changed the password on the kids' 529 plans, which were in my name as custodian anyway, and I locked them with 2-factor authentication tied to a phone number. He didn't know I had a cheap second phone I bought at a Best Buy and paid for in cash. I made copies of everything I might ever need: birth certificates, social security cards, passports, the kids' shot records, the deed to the house, the title to my car. I put them in a safety deposit box at the credit union. I went to Target and bought a new suitcase in a color he would not recognize, and I packed it with 2 weeks of clothes for me and the girls. I drove it to his mother's condo and she put it in her guest room closet. I called Constance and told her I was ready. She drafted the complaint. She held it. We picked a date for filing the Monday after the anniversary party. The Saturday of the party arrived, hot for early June. His mother's yard looked like a wedding. The caterer had set up 2 long tables with white linen runners. There were peonies in mason jars his mother had cut from her own garden. The bistro lights were strung between the trees and a big oak that had been there since his father planted it 40 years earlier. 26 people. I wore a navy dress. My mother-in-law wore lavender. Hazel and June were in matching white sundresses, and I had braided both their hair that morning, slowly, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, telling them what good girls they were, while I thought about what was about to happen to their lives. I want to tell you I was calm. I wasn't. I was a coiled spring inside a navy dress. But I'd been a coiled spring inside one dress or another for 11 weeks, and I had become very, very good at it. He gave a toast around 8 o'clock. He stood up with his glass of Cabernet in front of his college roommates and his parents and our daughters, and he said the words 15 years and my best friend and the love of my life, and people raised their glasses and I raised mine and I drank. Then he set his phone down on the cocktail table next to the cheese board and he went inside to get another bottle. The phone rang while he was in the kitchen. I picked it up. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I did not answer it on purpose to humiliate him in front of everyone. I picked it up because every wife in the world, when her husband's phone rings, glances down to see who it is. The screen was face up. The name was Whitney, with a pink heart emoji. The profile photo was a blonde in a Lululemon tank top who I had been looking at on Instagram for 3 months. I tapped accept. I tapped the speaker icon. I held the phone in my hand and I did not say a word. A woman's voice came through, breathy and warm, the voice you use only with somebody you are sleeping with. Baby, I can't stop thinking about last weekend. Tell me you're almost done with the family thing. I miss you. The yard went still. 26 people. A breeze moved the bistro lights. His mother set her wine glass down on the patio stones so carefully and so deliberately, and it slipped, and it shattered. That was the first sound. I held the phone up a little higher, like a microphone, and I smiled at it, and I said in the calmest voice I have ever produced in my life, "Hi, Whitney. This is Margot. I'm his wife. You should come on over. We're celebrating 15 years of marriage. It seems like the perfect time for you to meet everyone." There was a sound on the other end of the line like she had dropped the phone. I kept going. "I have to thank you, actually. The Schwab account, the apartment in Dublin, the David Yurman bracelet. You've been so wonderfully documented. My lawyer says you're the cleanest paper trail she's ever seen. I file Monday. Take care of yourself." I ended the call. I set the phone down on the cocktail table, face up, exactly where he had left it. That was when he came out of the kitchen with the bottle of Cabernet in his hand. He looked around at the silent yard. He looked at his mother's face. He looked at me. The thing that happened to his face is the only part of all of this I sometimes feel sorry about, late at night. He understood in real time that the life he had been living was over, and that everyone he loved had just watched it end. He said my name once, just the first part of it. I said, "Don't." His mother stood up. She walked across the patio in her lavender dress, glass crunching under her sandals, and she put herself between me and her son the way a body puts itself between a child and traffic. She said, in a voice I had never heard her use in 11 years of being her daughter-in-law, "You will leave my house. You will leave it now. You will not speak to your wife. You will not speak to your daughters. You will get in your car and you will go, and we will figure out the rest tomorrow." He stood there with the wine bottle in his hand. I think he was crying. I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my daughters who had come out of the swing set in the back of the yard, holding hands, faces confused and a little scared. I walked across the grass and I knelt in front of them and I said, "Hey monkeys, Grandma's house tonight. Bring biscuit." Hazel, who is 11 and already smarter than I deserve, looked at me and said, "Are you okay, Mama?" I said, "I'm going to be." He left. He took nothing with him. He drove to a hotel. Monday morning at 9:02 a.m. Constance filed. "I will spare you the divorce itself, because divorces are tedious even when they are righteous. I will tell you that the Schwab account, plus the apartment, plus the credit card, plus the gifts, came to about $140,000 in dissipated marital assets, all of which were credited to my side of the ledger. I will tell you that I got the house. I will tell you that the 529 plans never moved. I will tell you that his company has a morality clause in the regional director contracts that I learned about the hard way, and that he learned about the harder way, and that he learned about the harder way, and that within 90 days he was not a regional director anymore. I will tell you that Whitney, the woman on the phone, called me 3 weeks after the party. I almost didn't pick up. I did pick up. She was crying. She said she hadn't known he was married for the first 8 months. She said when she found out, she'd tried to leave and he told her we were already separated. She said she was sorry. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her there wasn't, but that I was glad she'd called. I told her one thing: if he ever came back to her and told her I'd lied, or that the kids weren't his, or that he'd given up everything for her, and I knew he would, because men like him always do, she should remember this phone call. She should remember that I told her the truth, on the worst day of my life, and he told her a story. I never heard from her again. I hope she's all right. His mother kept her word. She has the girls every other weekend. She comes to every recital and every soccer game. She and I have a standing brunch on the first Sunday of every month at Pamela's in Squirrel Hill, and we order the same thing every time, the crepe-style hotcakes with strawberries, and we don't always talk about him, but sometimes we do, and the talking gets easier. I want to say a few things to you if you've stayed with me this long. I want to say that I did not feel powerful building that case. I felt sick most days. I felt like I was lying to my husband, even though he was the one lying to me, and that asymmetry sat on my chest for 11 weeks like a brick. The only thing that kept me going was the knowledge that one conversation, one impulsive confrontation, one "I saw your prescription," would have given him 11 weeks to hide things, lawyer up, move money, and turn his mother against me. Silence was not deception. Silence was preparation. Silence was the most loving thing I ever did for my daughters, because it brought them a mother who landed standing up. I want to say that I am so grateful I never quit my job. I am so grateful I had my own paycheck and my own 401k, and a maiden name I could still open accounts under, and a sister who knew exactly which questions to ask. If you are a young woman reading this, please, please, please keep something of yourself outside the marriage. A career, a savings account, a name, a skill, a best friend who knew you before. Not because you expect to need it, because you cannot know whether you will need it. I want to say that the cliché is true. The mistress is not your enemy. The mistress is often also being lied to. Save your fight for the one who made the vows. And I want to say one more thing. A week after he left, I was cleaning out his nightstand. In the back of the bottom drawer, under a stack of golf digests, I found an envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. Just Margot. It wasn't sealed. I sat on the edge of the bed and I opened it. It was a letter he had written, by the date at the top, about 4 months earlier. A letter telling me about the affair, about Whitney, about the apartment in Dublin, about how he was sorry and confused and didn't know what he wanted and couldn't bring himself to say any of it out loud. A confession he had written and never delivered, 4 months before I found that prescription at CVS. He had been carrying it around the whole time. He had wanted to be caught. I sat on the bed and I read it twice. Then I took it downstairs and I put it through the shredder in his old home office, one slow page at a time. Because I was not going to be the woman who took a confession on his timeline. I was the woman who picked up the phone. I have thought a lot, in the 2 years since that night in my mother-in-law's backyard, about how a marriage ends in slow motion long before anyone says the word divorce. My husband did not wake up one morning and choose Whitney. He chose her in 1,000 small surrenders, one at a time over years. He chose her every time he told himself a hotel room was no one's business. He chose her every time he wrote me a confession letter and put it in a drawer instead of in my hands. And the cause built, quietly, the way water builds behind a dam, until the day a pharmacist at a CVS in Wexford slid a receipt across the counter and the whole thing broke. I do not believe in fate. I believe in consequence. I believe that the man I married spent 2 years constructing the exact ending he got, and that I spent 11 weeks deciding I would not let his consequences swallow mine. That is the difference between being a victim and being an author. Both of us were responsible for what happened in his mother's backyard. He was responsible for the affair. I was responsible for the answer. If I have learned anything worth passing on, it is this. Be honest, even when honesty is inconvenient. The 4 months my husband carried that letter in his drawer were the most cowardly months of his life, and they cost him his daughters, his mother, his career, and the only woman who had ever loved him without conditions. A lie deferred is not a kindness, it is just a heavier debt. Be smart. Smart is not cynical. Smart is prepared. Smart is keeping your own paycheck and your own name and a sister who picks up on the second ring. Smart is one conversation with a lawyer before you have a single conversation with a husband. I am not telling you to mistrust the person you love. I am telling you to never be so trusting that betrayal could erase you. The world rewards women who know where their own paperwork is, and be strong. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that wakes up at 5:15 in the morning and laces up running shoes she hasn't worn in 12 years because her body is the only thing she still owns outright. The kind that lies next to a man for 11 weeks without flinching because flinching costs her daughters their future. The kind that, when the phone rings at her own anniversary party, does not scream and does not weep, but picks it up and says hello. My daughters are watching me now. Hazel is 13. June is 10. They saw a marriage end. They are also seeing what comes after a marriage ends, and that part, I think, is the part that will shape them. They are seeing a mother who landed on her feet, who kept her grandmother close, who runs 3 mornings a week, who pays her own mortgage, who tells the truth even when it is ugly, and who never ever again will be the last person in her own life to know what is going on inside it. That is the inheritance I am leaving them. Not the house, though they will have the house. The standing up,